Janice, do we have any apologies that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, Leader.
Thank you.
I'm having difficulty getting Councillor Samuel on the call.
Okay. Have we got somebody trying to dial Councillor Samuel in?
Yes, we're on the case. It looks like she's joining us now.
Okay. We'll carry on in that case. So item 2 is declarations of interest. Members are invited to declare any personal or disclosable pecuniary interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any items to be considered at this meeting. Does anyone have any declarations of interest they would like to make?
Hi, Leader. Sorry I'm late. I just couldn't get on.
That's okay. Good to see you, Councillor Samuel. I've not got anything coming forward in terms of declarations of interest. So we will move to the third item on the agenda, items requiring urgent attention. I've not been notified of any. Janice, is there anything we need to deal with in terms of urgent matters?
No, Leader.
Okay, in which case we will move to item 4, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. We'll just go through the minutes of the previous agenda, if we can take them page by page. So of these minutes, any comments on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4? And page 5. So I will accept those as a record of the meeting and sign them in due course. So thank you very much, members. Okay, item 5 is public questions. I've not been notified of any public questions. Is there anything you've been notified of, Janice?
No, thank you, Leader.
Okay, so we'll move on to item 6, which is the Hub Committee Forward Plan. You've been circulated a copy of the forward plan in the usual format. I think at this stage we'll just ask if anybody has any comments, any errors or omissions that are on there. If you'd like to comment, we'll make sure those get dealt with. But I think other than that, it's straightforward and we know what's coming up. Any comments from anybody?
If I may please, Chair.
Councillor Mott.
At some point, Chair, we need to add in, please, the adoption of the World Heritage Site Management Plan, please.
Okay.
So whether we can, I'd have to check with Mr. Wright whether we can do that through approval through the Hub Committee, or whether it would need to go to full council, please.
Okay, I think we'll take that forward if we may with Mr. White, and we'll make sure we get that on one or other of those agendas.
Many thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments, observations?
Neil, I've got one. Are you looking at your chat box?
Well, yeah, I can see it now. Yes, thank you. Councillor Cheadle.
Yeah, just a comment really. I've had a chat, well, a couple of minutes ago with Drew Powell about the recovery plan.
Yeah.
And I think there might be the need for a short email or something just to set out what we're expecting the working groups to do time-wise with the task in front of them. I'm not sure everyone's got the same sort of message, as it were. And I think where we're heading is that all the working groups that are looking at aspects of the recovery plan are going to report in to ONS. But I'm not sure all the working groups have met or have the time frame that they're working to. So Drew's agreed to put out a sort of simple set of instructions really on what we're looking for.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Powell. I don't know whether you want to make any comment on that, Mr. Powell, or we'll take that forward as suggested.
No, thank you, Chair. No, that's fine. Take that forward as suggested. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other comments on the forward plan, members? In which case
there's a request from Councillor Ewings.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Ewings.
Good afternoon, Leader. Yes, the working groups are supposed to be coming back into ONS for it to go to, it was going to be the late November meeting that we've got of ONS because it was quite a hurried, a targeted piece of work. So I think that is still the case, and I'm sure Mr. White or Mr. Powell will correct me if I'm wrong. But yes, it is a, timed piece of work.
Okay, thank you. It's very important we don't lose our focus on that and that we do move that forward. It's a really important piece of work, and I fully support the attempt to make sure we get that on the correct agendas and move it forward quickly.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jury.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is the capital budget monitoring Q1 and Q2. If I could ask Councillor Edmonds to please introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. The report provides an update on the capital programme as at the 31st of August 2020. You will have noted that all capital projects are within the individual capital budgets approved by members. The programme is currently underspent due mainly to the capital schemes for the Tavistock temporary accommodation development, which is a separate item on this afternoon's agenda, and the community housing schemes at Brentor and Lamerton being in the early stages of development. The report and Appendix B provide an update on each of the capital projects, and I think they're self-explanatory. Appendix A sets out details of the capital budget, including the amount spent to date. Both appendices contain restricted information and are therefore Part 2 items. The capital programme is due to be reviewed as part of the financial sustainability theme in the Recovery and Renewal Plan, but at this stage, members are being asked to endorse the contents of the report. Thank you, Chair. I think you're on mute now.
Thank you, Councillor. Just struggling to get the right buttons up on the screen and unmute myself, so apologies for that. Okay, members, are there any questions? I don't have any questions coming forward. I think the report it's self-explanatory to me, and I think, Councillor, we can move straight to the recommendation if you'd like to propose.
Yes, certainly, Chair. I move the recommendation on page 11 of your agenda papers, which asks members to endorse the contents of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Any debate? Well, I do apologise. I don't think I called for a second to that.
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. Any debate, members? I'm getting no debate coming forward. I think we can take this one as an approval unless anybody would like to indicate they would like to vote against or abstain.
It's to endorse it, Leader.
Thank you. I take it that we are prepared to endorse unless anybody indicates to the contrary. Okay, are you happy with that, Janice?
Yes, thank you, Leader.
Okay, thank you. we'll move to the next item on the agenda in that case, which is the medium-term financial strategy. And this is one that I'm going to introduce. You have a paper in front of you. I'm grateful to the finance team in their usual way for putting this paper together. It sets out an overall summary of our financial position over a rolling 5-year time frame. The situation, as we know, is well documented. We're quite used to looking at this on this basis, and we are, as you know, reliant on for income on our share of council tax and the national non-domestic rate, and any other income that we generate from other sources. There are a number of key assumptions which are made in putting this this forecast together, and they are outlined in section 1.9. They include our assessment that there will be a rollover settlement for 1 year with no negative revenue support grant for the coming year. Using these figures, there is a forecast budget gap for 2021-2022 of 176,000. This needs to be closed, and a process to do that will start immediately. Unlike this current year where we had an emergency budget and we have funded some of the shortfall from reserves, my view is that on these forecast budget gaps, we do need to look at the structural costs underlying those figures, and we do need to make sure we close them as far as we possibly can and present a balanced budget. It's dependent on a lot of factors, including our income holding up in these current difficult times, no further lockdowns, and so on and so forth. Anything like that will clearly affect the figures moving forward from here. One of the reasons for needing to look at the structural costs and to close the gap is that if nothing is done, that gap will increase to around £1.1 million per annum by 2025-2026, by which time the aggregated gap, adding up all of the years in the medium-term financial strategy, will be something over £3 million. And clearly that's not sustainable. Options about closing the gap will be reported to the Hub in December, and will then form the start of the normal round of budget activity that we undertake in order to present our budget to the council in due course. The recommendations within the report are accepting that we will undoubtedly need to raise council tax by the maximum amount that will be allowed. That in itself will be decided by council in February. That we will continue to respond to the consultation on the business rates reform, and will lobby through the usual channels for continued support from the government, particularly bearing in mind the national non-domestic rate reset, and also looking at the negative revenue support grant situation moving forward from here. The recommendations also make provision to keep our borrowing limit at a figure of £50 million. I don't see any reason for us at the moment to be looking to increase that, although clearly it's something that can be maintained under review if suitable capital projects come forward in due course. And finally, the recommendations ask the committee to note the anticipated gaps and the timetable the timetable for addressing them. So on that note, I'd just like to ask if there are any questions about any aspects of the report, and if so, we'll do our best to answer them. Members, any questions?
Neil, I've got a question or two.
Yeah. So, Councillor Cheadle, you have a question.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually a question about the information in Annex A, to which I'm sure Lisa will have at her fingertips. In the table in Annex A, it talks about anticipated income from leisure centres. I just wonder how relevant that is, given what's going on at the moment. Presumably, okay, Lisa, that's an assumption that, you know, COVID will be well behind us in sort of 12 months' time, is it?
I'm happy to answer that question, Leader.
Yeah, councillors, you must obviously bear in mind that Annex A is exempt, and obviously if we're going to start talking about specific figures, we would need to move into part two. But if you're happy with a general response,
yeah,
I think
exactly.
that would be fine.
Yes, thank you. So in Appendix A, it does show anticipated savings from the leisure contract, and the figures that are shown in 21-22 and 22-23 are based on the renegotiated management fees less the amounts of borrowing which we would have to repay. So those are figures based on the renegotiated position, and the renegotiated position is that management fees would be due from the financial year of 21-22 onwards, so from April 21 onwards. Thank you.
Yes, can I just come back on that?
Yes, of course you can.
I'm not going into any specifics of figures or anything like that. It's the principle I'm really sort of digging at. With all these assumptions, have we sort of done a sort of COVID paintbrush on them, if I can put it that way? Or, I mean, that one looks to me as if it's simply the figures that were there before, if you see what I mean.
No, those are revised figures from the figures that we had in, say, last February when we set the budget. So the figures have been revised based on the new figures which we've had from the leisure provider.
Okay, that's fine. The other one, which is a tiddler, you've got in the same annex the members' locality fund figure.
Yes.
At a minus sum, which presumably means an underspend, does it?
That amount is in the base budget now, the 15,500, which is the £500 per member.
Right. So I mean, it's still very much a sum of money that members can elect to spend in their communities.
Yes, absolutely. And any amount unspent in a financial year, we do roll forward into the next financial year until we get to the end of the 4-year term, and it has to be spent by the end of that 4th year.
And at the moment, our assumptions retain that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
okay,
right.
That's all. Thanks very much. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. Yeah, obviously we share your concerns that I'm sure you're alluding to in terms of how income will hold up in the post-COVID environment, and I think one of the things we'll be seeking is to get more clarification on that as we move forward. Councillor Edmonds.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think I've got 3 questions here. The first one is on page 26, 1.10, and it's a question really to Mrs. Bucko. This cumulative budget gap, is it really necessary to report that one? Because I think I'm right in saying it's something that simply couldn't happen.
Yes, that is right. It was a recommendation from a previous peer review that we had, and I am going back now to 2012 when we had that peer review, but part of the peer review recommendations were that, as well as showing the new budget gap for each financial year, that we also showed the cumulative position if that gap were not to be closed in each financial year. But you are quite right. The reason we didn't show that previously was because you can never get into that position, because it is a legal requirement to set a balanced budget in each financial year individually, and therefore the agreed way forward as part of that peer review was that we would show both. We would show the new budget gap, which is the real figure I think we need to focus on, which is the 1.1 million over the next 5 financial years. But in addition to that, we would show the cumulative budget gap, which would show the position if we don't address those budget gaps in each financial year. So that second row in 1.10 does add up and show the cumulative position. So, for example, in 22-23, it's showing there that the budget gap is 291. Well, that's the budget gap from 21-22 of 175 plus a new budget gap of 115. So it's showing the cumulative position if those budget gaps on a yearly basis are not addressed. I do agree that it can be confusing, and therefore we try to explain what the difference is between those new budget gaps and the cumulative position. But I think the real figure to focus on is the 1.15 budget gap over the next 5 financial years.
Yeah, that's my point really, that I don't think it particularly adds anything to the report other than perhaps some confusion, because it's not really realistic. But I guess it has to stay there.
If its members wish to take that figure out, I certainly wouldn't have any problem with that. It's however it's best for members to understand it, really.
Yeah.
I'm happy to bring in the Chief Executive, who also may have a view.
So thanks, Lisa, for that. Yes, I'm very much of the same view as you. I think actually it's quite misleading to have the cumulative budget gap, and whilst that might be the advice from my former colleagues in the LJ, it wouldn't have been my own advice. I think that the point that Councillor Edmonds has made is absolutely correct. We should focus absolutely on the new budget gap each year, and provided we carry on being the well-managed, financially managed council that we've been for many years now, then I'm confident that that's the only figure we really need. So if members were minded to, we'd be more than happy to take the other figure out.
Yes, thank you for that, Mr. Bates. Well, yeah, I don't know, Chair, if you wish to take this forward, not necessarily at this meeting, but it may be a discussion point, and perhaps, Mrs. Buckle, perhaps it's one we can pick up again at our next FSG meeting. Perhaps that might be an opportunity to broaden the conversation and come back to members if we think there is a case to perhaps drop it off future reports.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Edmonds. I'd be very happy to pick that up in the next FSG meeting.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Ron. I think can I just mention, Councillor, that I think I understand where you're coming from, and I think probably talking about it in the next financial stability group is the right forum to do that. If it does nothing else, it shows us how much we would need to have in reserve if we did nothing year on year, and there is that whole element of the way that the losses, the shortfalls will ramp up if we don't address the underlying structural costs that we need to look at year on year.
Yeah. So are you content, Chair, that we pick it up in an FSG meeting?
I think we should pick it up in an FSG meeting. I'm totally in favour of that.
Thank you for that. Shall I move on to my second point, Chair?
Please do.
I'm on page 28 now, 3.2, and it talks about no council tax collection fund surplus has been assumed. Is it possible that it could go the other way, that we could have a deficit on the collection fund? And if so, would that have to be adjusted or repaid via revenue? And if so, obviously there'd be implications on our budget if that were the case. Although I'm moving quickly on to 4.22, I'm mindful that there is an encouraging comment in there that it talks about council tax losses and that the government could agree some apportionment. So maybe there may not be an issue with it, but I just wondered, would be interested to know Mrs. Buckle's thoughts around this collection fund.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Edmonds. So yes, we are anticipating that it is very likely that we will have a collection fund deficit, and I think that's probably the position that the majority of councils are anticipating. With regards to that, we do, when we closed the accounts at 31st of March 2020, we did have a surplus on the council tax collection fund of 396,000. So we have got some surplus surplus there from the previous financial year that would be able to absorb some of the reduction in collection which we think we will have from council tax. Having said that, in the report, the figures as at the end of August are holding up. So at the end of August, we've collected 46.42 of council tax, which is a decrease of 0.55% from where we would have been this time last year in 1920. So that would equate to a loss of council tax income of about 235,000, and our share of that would be around 26,000. So that's the position at the end of August. So we are about 0.55% down on our collection rate. In the medium term financial strategy, I've assumed a reduction in the council tax collection rate of 1%. We are concerned whether we will see a reduction in the collection rate once the furlough scheme ends. So we will be keeping an eye on what's happening with those collection fund rates. We also will have reminders going out early November for going out in the first 2 weeks. So again, we need to see what impact that has on the council tax collection rate. But yes, we will be doing the calculation very shortly, which looks at the collection fund position and estimates what the actual will be for 2021. And then we have to make a calculation of how much council tax surplus or council tax deficit there is on the collection fund, not only for ourselves but also for the precepting authority. So Devon County, the police and the fire pick up a share of the surplus or the deficit as well. And we've recently had a meeting of the Devon 151 officers where we're looking at that, but I think we are anticipating that we will move into a deficit position. And in terms of what impact would that have, whereas in the past in the funding line in the appendix we would normally have a council tax surplus of around about 60,000, we could have a small deficit share there that we may need to pick up. At the moment I've assumed nil, so I've assumed no council tax surplus but also no council tax deficit, but we'll need to keep an eye on that over the next couple of months and see how collection rates for council tax are holding up, but also bearing in mind we do have that small surplus coming forward from the previous financial year, which would help us as well.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Buckle. That is a very comprehensive response. And your point on collection rates is excellent. We are third in the league table of districts as at the end of August, behind East Devon and South Hams at 46.42. So I think that is excellent in terms of West Devon residents in maintaining their council tax. It's a really good result. And my final point, if I may, is on page 39, 5.2, where I note that two members have requested an increase to the contribution to the Community Safety Partnership, and I just wondered how much we're talking about, when was it last reviewed, and I'll further note that the Community Safety Partnership is not in the list of partnership agreements, which is somewhere in the medium-term financial strategy report. So I just wonder, when are we going to pick that up? How much and where does it fit within the budget setting process? Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. I'm happy to take that question. So yes, this was, so when we did the work on the amended budget, this was something that was picked up, and it was also picked up in last year's budget workshop survey as well, in that some members did request that we look at the contribution to the Community Safety Partnership. I believe there is a report on the Community Safety Partnership coming to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 10th of November. December, and that sets out our current contribution to that partnership, and we currently contribute just under 17,000. I think it's 16,679, and that's mainly in staff costs. And it also sets out that the Community Safety Partnership itself receives funding from the Safer Communities Funding Workstream. So probably the best way to address it may be if we bring some text back as part of the December budget proposals report, once the Overview and Scrutiny Committee have had a chance to debate that at their November meeting, and then bring that back for members' consideration as part of the December budget report.
Yes.
With regards to your question about it wasn't in the partnership reports, I think that's because we don't contribute physical money. We contribute towards two people's salaries rather than a cash amount that we give to a partnership as such. And so I think that's why it's treated slightly differently.
All right, I understand. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, happy with that. Thank you, Mrs. Buckle. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mrs. Buckle. Councillor Daniel, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about our lobbying of government and how often we approach our MPs with our circumstances and ask for their support. And also, can we have regular updates from them around the situation we find ourselves in and what they're doing for us in Parliament? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We do correspond with our MPs on a regular basis as and when needed, in particular when specific examples come up. As far as our MPs coming and talking to us, that's something we also have in mind, and I'm very keen that we should arrange a meeting and that the MPs should come collectively or separately and talk to members at some time in the very near future, so watch this space.
Thank you.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Leader. I'd like to comment, if I may, just briefly on the cumulative deficit figure. I have to disagree with Councillor Edmonds and our Chief Executive, because it became very evident under T18 and in the early days of T18 that the cumulative figure helped to concentrate the mind on those members who weren't involved in the everyday finance of the council. And I think it's important that, you know, we've got some difficult decisions ahead, I believe, unless the government are a bit more forthcoming with their money. And, you know, I would like to retain that. I know it's extra work for Mrs. Buckle and her team, but I think it's important that we can see, you know, what the long-term effect is if we don't take difficult decisions, which we sometimes have to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Your comments are noted, and I think we will discuss it in some detail at a future financial strategy group. Councillor Sellis.
Thanks very much, Leader. It's not a question, so I'm all right to comment.
Yes, please comment.
Well, really, it's just following on, just bringing in quite a lot of the comments which members have already raised. Had an interesting conversation this morning where and we feel that perhaps residents, tax-paying residents, do need to have a better picture of where their money, where their hard-earned taxes are actually going. I know that West Devon Borough Council has a really nice pictorial pie chart of you know, how much goes to the fire service, Devon County, etc. But it might be a bad idea to describe how much a teacher costs, or how much it costs for your bin being collected and your curbside waste, that type of thing. And it's just a suggestion that the comms team perhaps could be able to make a more informative pictorial demonstration of where the the taxes are actually going, because the council tax is eye-watering, and yet as a councillor mentioned the other day, the incomes, the national homes incomes and everything in West Devon are very poor in general. So I think that this is something that we're going to have to do so that people do understand more clearly where their hard-earned taxes are going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm all in favour of us being clear and transparent and giving people information, and I suggest that's something we can take up with comms as part of the budget setting process. So let's do that. Any other questions, councillors? In which case I'd like to move, if I may, the recommendations. They are recommendations to council at the moment, and I'd like, if there's no objections, to move them on block. The recommendations are on pages 23 and 24 of your minutes, recommendations 1 through 5, and also 2 supplementary recommendations asking councillors to note the budget gap and the timetable for producing providing options to this committee. I think, again, I mean, somebody happy to second those recommendations?
Yes, I'm happy to second those.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. I think we'll take these by exception. Again, if anyone not prepared to offer their support to those recommendations? If so, would you like to indicate in the comments box? I've got nothing coming forward, so I will take that as unanimous, if that's okay, Janice.
Thank you, Leader.
Okay, thank you, members. If we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 9, the housing strategy. And if I please hand over to Councillor Sellis in order to introduce this paper.
Thank you, Leader. Members are aware that it's our intention to adopt a 5-year housing strategy in April 2021 with South Hams Council. We've had excellent workshops and there's been a lot of member involvement, and we've been able to discuss our key objectives. We plan to have a draft strategy available for public consultation in December, the Christmas period, with an adoption in 2021. Better homes, better lives has been suggested as our overall ambition for our housing strategy, with an emphasis on the quality of homes and the best use of our existing housing stock, which is already built. So that's in essence what the introduction is, Leader. For the record, I think we are aware about how what quite a savage beast the Revs and Benefits and Housing team has been thrown. You know, they've been having to be so flexible and innovative, and I just am concerned that they've had Revs and Benefits thrown in. They've had the all the COVID associated loans and grants, and we really do need, that they're a super lean team, and I'm reassured by the lead officer, Isabel Blake, that she is in close contact with the SLT senior leadership team, and that they are well aware that they are actually being very squeezed. So I just think that we as a hub and all councillors need to be aware of this, and that to have the strategic housing document as well is a terrific amount of work that they're facing. They've got the track and trace as well, all that. So I'll leave it there, Leader, and I don't know whether Isabel wishes to Izzy, whether you wish to say anything.
Yes. I mean, it's certainly an ambitious and challenging piece of work that we've come quite far in, and obviously there's lots of obstacles that are being thrown in our way in the meantime. But at the moment, it definitely feels achievable. And I know we're having another meeting at the rise of this one about getting ready for the second wave, which feels almost upon us. But the team working on this, and it's not just housing revs and bends, it is across department, cross area piece of work. Everybody understands that it's a corporate priority, and is prioritizing the work wherever possible. So all is well at the moment. But certainly, I mean, the report does hopefully reflect those members' sessions, and the priorities and the ambition that members came up with, which I think was really encouraging. Some really great stuff around best use of stock. And the actual, the delivery of new homes that people can afford, and meeting the different needs in the community that we have. So things are shaping up. We're working away at that so that we can come back with not only a strategy but the delivery plan of how we're going to meet those ambitions.
Great, thank you, Councillor Sellis. Thank you, Mrs. Blake. Moving into questions, members. Councillor Cheadle, you have a question.
Yes, thanks, Neil. I've got a question for Izzy. It looks, I'm afraid, as if we're sort of going to face two competing forces. One on one side, probably a squeeze on our resources, the amount of money we're going to have to do all the things we want to do, and on the other hand, a increase in the number of people requiring that help. So we're squeezing the toothpaste tube from both ends, if I can mix my metaphors completely. And I just wondered where you see the biggest threat coming from to being able to deliver our housing strategy.
I think some of the challenge will come from whether we are able to be strategic, or whether we are just in the throes of firefighting, and that's really difficult to know about what the impact on mortgage repossessions, homelessness, big house builders going, struggling to sell their new homes, and there's so much that is going to be a concern. But do I think that our ambition and our priorities will change? I don't think so. I think that we'll still want to look at reducing fuel poverty. I still think that we will need to look at planning for future health needs to ensure that the every pound that we're spending on housing related activity is well spent. So I think that the overall priorities that you've set, the pace in which we might be able to do it might change, but I think there's nothing wrong with having the ambitions that you've got. Yeah, but I'm sorry, that probably is a bit of a woolly answer, Councillor Cheadle, but we just don't know what's going to happen when even the end of the month, or when the eviction ban gets lifted. It's really not knowing. There's some good signs though. We had a meeting with Live West, who said that actually the wider Plymouth area, as far as rent arrears, is performing below the rest of their stock, so that they've not got big rent arrears in our area, which is really encouraging. We're not seeing lots of increased demand for the discretionary housing payment, or landlords having even informal conversations to say, we know we can't evict at the moment, but actually we want to tell you what our intention intentions are. So we're trying to do some press around that. There's been bits and pieces out there about that to make sure that landlords know what their rights are. But it is a bit of an unknown at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a woolly answer, it was a woolly question.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Bates would like to comment on that point, I think.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, just if I could please to say we have had regular conversations at SLT about the housing strategy. We are also very conscious of the competing demands on colleagues' time. I'd just like to back up what Izzy has said. I mean, we will stick to the strategic, but I'm just slightly preempting the discussion that will follow at the all-member briefing. We will be making clear later this afternoon that we may well have to refocus our attention from recovery back towards response. And if that is the case, it's possible we may have to pause some of our project work, and housing strategy would be one of those areas we would have to think about. Clearly, if that were the case, we would plan to come back at a later date and complete that work whilst we've focused on more immediate priorities. So I just wanted to make that point, Leader, but we will keep all of those things in balance. And at the moment, we are fully committed to moving forward on the housing strategy and moving forward with the implementation for that plan too.
Thank you. That's encouraging. Councillor Edmonds, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Really, I think just a point of clarification, and that is on page 54 at 2.2, where it says the JLP is demonstrating through our mind it's already delivering the required 30% affordable housing. Is that across the plan area, or is that referring to West Devon? Are we achieving our 30% across our council?
Mrs. Blake, are you able to enlighten us on that at all?
Sorry, I will get the answer to you by the end of this session. I will just ask Phil Baker, who will have that answer. I think it's across the plan area, but I will just double check that detail.
Thank you. That would be great. Any other questions, members? I can't see any coming forward. Councillor Mott, are you trying to ask a question?
No, it was just really to hopefully answer Councillor Edmonds' questions, in that it is being monitored across the plan area, but we also monitor each individual LPA as well to make sure that we are each delivering our targets as required.
Thank you, Councillor Mott.
Thank you. There's no other questions coming forward, members, so perhaps I could ask Councillor Sellis to move the recommendations.
Yes, happy to move the recommendation, Leader. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Any debate, members? There's no debate coming forward, so I'm inclined again to take these by exception. If any members could indicate if they're not prepared to support the recommendations.
Shall I move the recommendations, Leader?
I think you have, Councillor.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, my screen's going. I haven't set up my big screen yet.
Okay, I've got no indications to the contrary, so I'm happy to take that as a unanimous approval of the recommendations. Thank you, Janice.
Thank you, Leader.
Okay, if we can move forward to item 10, which is the Spring Hill update. And it's back to you, Councillor Sellis, if you could kindly fill in the background to this paper for us.
Yes, I think actually for brevity I will just defer to Dan Field, who is the project manager leading on this, as this is an exciting opportunity for West Devon Borough Council, and on a personal note, I'm very pleased to be working with it. So if I could just hand over to Dan, please.
Thank you, Councillor Sellis. Wasn't prepared for that, but no problem.
No, I'm sorry. Well,
that's okay.
Yeah.
As Councillor says, this is a project in Tavistock. It's looking at the redevelopment of a property which we took back into our ownership approximately just over a year ago. The property, as you would have seen in the document, it's a very prominent building. It was used for homeless provision by Westwood Homes. And since for last year, it's been empty with the exception of the end units which are used by Young Devon. So the project has been looking at how we can bring this property back into use and to meet the project aspirations, which is a high quality, healthy living environment for people when they most need that. We've been working through the COVID sort of period with our architects to look at things from retaining the building as it is, rehabilitating it, through to the potential to demolish it and rebuild. The current situation is that we've gone through that process, and we feel the best option to address most of the project objectives is a demolition with material resalvaging and rebuild on a larger footprint. So currently there are 9 units in the facility. We'll be looking to provide 11 or 12, and we have drawn up an agreed operational layout with the housing team, who will ultimately be managing this facility once we've gone through the relevant planning processes. And that's where we are at the moment. We're about to complete what we call stage 2, which is really setting that scene, consideration of heritage, and moving into looking at materials consideration of materials, and again the heritage side of things for this particular building. So that's where the project is at the moment. I think that's sort of set out hopefully within the report that you would have all read. And really that's all I have to say. It's a fantastic opportunity. It's a challenging project, very challenging site, but a great opportunity for West Devon to sort of lead in that new facility. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Great, thank you, Mr. Field. Any questions from members? Please bear in mind that the draft business case in Appendix B is exempt, and if you want to ask detailed questions about that, we would have to move into Part 2. But does anyone have any questions? Councillor Daniel.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask about the energy efficiency of the new building and what's been taken into consideration, as well as the heritage aspects. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Field, do you have any information on that aspect?
Yes, Chair, I can sort of give an overview of that. So in moving forward through the programme, we've been following a standard which is referred to as BREEAM. This is a sort of national leading standard for looking at sustainability. So that allows us to work through some of the key parts to that healthy building footprint and the envelope. So we're looking at material consideration, but also things like solar thermal, and we're working through them at the moment with the architect to try and create like a very good energy efficiency building. That's the whole ethos of following BREEAM. So I don't have the exact sort of number at the moment, but I can inform you we're looking for a very high standard.
If I may interject there, Councillor Daniels, that is something we feel very strongly about as a council, that we have declared the climate emergency, signed everything relating to the climate emergency. So this is an opportunity where we demonstrate our commitment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? In which case, Councillor Sellis, if I could ask you to move the recommendations.
Oh, sorry, yes, sorry, I was muted. Yes, do you want me to read them out, or are you happy for me to say taken as read? I'm happy to move the recommendations.
You'll move the recommendations as they're shown on the screen.
Thank you. Yes, I move.
Could I have a seconder for the recommendations, please?
I'm happy to second those,
Happy
Chair.
to second, Leader.
Thank you. Any debate, members? I've got nothing coming forward, so again, I'm happy to take these by exception. If any members would like to indicate if they're not prepared to support the recommendations. And there's nothing coming forward, so I'm going to take that again as unanimous approval, Janice.
Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, members. If we can move on to the next item, which is item 11. This is for me to introduce. This is with regards to track and trace hardship payments. We were approached recently. You'll have seen, I'm sure, some information elsewhere about track and trace hardship payments. The government made a sum of money available. It's a relatively modest amount of money, but we were required to put a scheme in place to administer those payments with effect from the 12th of October in fairly short time. The Chief Executive has exercised his powers to do that, and the paper attaches an appendix which details the arrangements that have been put in place. So the arrangements are there. The recommendations are clear for everybody to see, and we're very happy to take any questions that may arise about these particular track and trace payments. Are there any questions, members? I've got no questions coming forward, in which case I would like to, if I may, move the recommendation, which is shown on page 111. Can I have a seconder for that recommendation, please?
Happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor. In the light of it being an approval of action that's been taken, Mr. White, could you advise, do we need to take a vote, a recorded vote on this one?
No, Leader. It's purely a process recommendation, Chair, so I'm happy if you follow the sort of same process as before in terms of vote by exception. Thank you.
I'm very happy with that, Mr. White. So I will take this again by exception. If anyone is not prepared to support the recommendation, perhaps they could indicate in the comments box. I've got nothing coming forward. So again, Janice, I'm prepared to take that as being a unanimous approval.
Thank you, Leader. Duly noted.
Thank you. So if we can move on to item 12, the Green Homes Grant. If I could ask Councillor Leach to please introduce this paper.
Once I've found the unmute.
I know, juggling everything and the unmute buttons is takes some dexterity.
It's also trying to find the item on my big screen. Right. The executive summary on this is in July 2020, the government announced £2 billion Green Homes Grant. That's a scheme to save households money, cut carbon and create jobs. The council, as part of a consortium with Southampton District Council, submitted a bid and have been awarded a sum of £224,500. The capital grant must be used to raise the energy efficiency of low income and low energy performance certificates, EPC rated households through fabric measures and low carbon heating such as heat pumps. The background, the housing stock within West Devon includes a large number of older style properties which are considered to be hard to treat. In terms of energy efficiency improvements, A key requirement of the bidding process was to prove deliverability of the project in the limited time frame. As a result of a previous procurement exercise, the council was able to satisfy the eligibility criteria. Outcomes of this, the grant will be used to deliver in the order of 14 external wall installations and 6 air source heat pumps for eligible households. And this is all got to be done by the end of March 2021. Capacity. One of the conditions of the capital grant is that a scheme is put in place that secures delivery of the installations by the end of March 2021, which is challenging given this is a new area of work. It is important to point out that the grant has been ordered from phase 1 of the Green Homes grant, and there are plans for a second phase post March 21, when hopefully more funds will be made available. Proposed way forward, it is proposed that officers implement the scheme in line with the bid to spend the 224,500 on the targeted installations by the end of March 2021. It is also proposed that officers look to realign existing resources to produce further work to support a reduction in fuel poverty and carbon emissions as detailed in 4.3. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Leach. Councillor Pearce has a question.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Leach. Given the alleged issues in Cornwall with companies being available to do the work, on properties for this, do we have a list of companies within Devon that will be able to carry out this work for us? Because it's a very short time frame. It's quite tight, actually, I think. And if people have to wait for somebody to come forward to do the work, it's going to make it very difficult. So I just wondered how confident we are that we've got the companies available to carry out the work for the householders who are eligible. Thank you.
I know that we are dealing with one source, and I'm not sure who's on the call because I can't see anybody, whether Mr. Powell or Dave Sexton has got that list.
Councillor Leach, it's Drew Powell here. I can come in there if that would help. We've got an existing relationship with SSE through a previous scheme we're operating, and they act as a sort of a connection to the actual installers. So there's no doubt this is a demanding piece of work to deliver in the timescale, especially under current arrangements. We're confident we can do it. Dave's working hard already in terms of identifying leads and making those connections with SSE. But it is a busy market at the moment, and there are other schemes that government have announced already. And there is, there's a question mark about the capacity of the installers and the actual hardware in some cases. But at this stage, we're confident we can deliver against the ambition to the end of March.
Thank you, Mr. Powell.
Can I just come in? I think I'm slightly concerned as well because there's quite a few organisations out there who are literally going door to door. And what we need to do is make sure, one, we don't do that, and two, we make sure that the people we contact can be assured that, or SSE are contacting, can be assured that it is a West Devon project and not one of these other schemes that seems to be catching quite a few people out.
Would you like me to come back on that again?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I think because of the relationship we've got with them from the previous scheme, we've got leads where people who applied for previous support to get gas-fired boilers were unable to do, say, do so for a number of reasons, including distance from the main and so on. So we've got the people who are eligible for some sort of support, weren't able to access that previous package, and are now able to access what is going to be far more environmentally friendly package, including the external wall insulation and the air source heat pumps. Certainly Dave works very closely with SSE to make sure that the customers are contacted in an appropriate way, and that we can fully audit the scheme. So it is relatively low numbers. We're only talking about 20 installations, but I can assure you that we're not sort of door knocking or operating the schemes that some of these other companies are doing. Having said that, it is a very competitive market, and as I said earlier, the government have launched a sort of plethora of different schemes at the moment. Some of them are very complicated. This one is quite straightforward, and as I say, I'm confident that we can deliver it in the appropriate way.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Councillor Sellis, you have a question.
I do. Thank you very much. Yes, for you, please, Drew. We note that there are vulnerable residents, and I welcome any help and support that they can get. And combining with reducing our carbon footprint and improving health and well-being. I have cases where the insulation, not only is the property not heat retaining, it also has no soundproofing. So there'll be no surprise here. It's something that I do ask about frequently. Is there any emphasis placed on insulating, keeping the properties warmer, but also incorporating better soundproofing? Many of our most vulnerable residents have mental health issues, a lot associated with noise. Thank you.
If I can come in there, I mean, the two schemes are the issues are separate, Councillor Sellis. The installation is there to, obviously provide that energy efficiency, a fabric first approach to improving the property. In most cases, that will have a benefit in terms of sound insulation, but the two are not. They're not the same. I think what we'd have to understand is what sort of properties you're talking about. If it's within properties owned by Live West, for example, and it's down to poor sound insulation, that's an issue we can take up with them as a landlord. If it's in private sector properties, it is more difficult. Older properties tend to not have the same level of insulation as new properties or well-built new properties, depending. So probably need to have a little bit more detail to see whether we can help out on that area, Councillor Sellis.
Thank you very much, Drew. Yeah, but the bottom line is, if we have these initiatives from government, we as a council should be combining things that we've known about for many years, things that I've been struggling to try and improve for many years, that we know that insulation of warmth and noise is of benefit to our most vulnerable. And it's all well and good putting these clean green schemes. I'm absolutely in favour of those, but it is, I feel, absolute duty to ensure that when there are works carried out in these older properties, which are harder to treat and harder to make more energy efficient, we shouldn't be silo working. We should be looking at this in a much more grounded and rounded fashion. Thank you very much.
Would you like me to come back on that, Councillor Leach? Well, I can. I mean, I think, yes, no, I totally understand what you're saying, Councillor Sellis. I think where possible, these sort of things can be considered together. The restrictions are often where the finance comes from. The money is usually comes from the energy companies, and it's calculated on the amount of financial savings to a property as a result of their installation. Again, I think where we're combining that sort of activity with Live West or similar RSLs, then I think there's a possibility to have those discussions. In private houses, it tends to be, unfortunately, limited to the energy efficiency measures. But as I say, they are by default will probably have a beneficial impact on sound between properties as well. Perhaps we can discuss sort of a bit more detail separately, Councillor Sellis.
Absolutely happy, but I feel that this has to be raised now. I have to highlight it because there are residents out there that I'm trying to help, and it's a very slow process.
Thank you. I think you've highlighted it, Councillor Sellis. That's and that can be taken forward as well. Councillor Daniel, you have a question.
Yes, I wanted to ask about the grants. Are they means tested grants so that they're directed towards people in fuel poverty that need help with insulation, or are they just based on the energy and efficiency of the particular property regardless of income? Thanks.
I can come in there. No, these are very much means tested. They're designed for the people on lower incomes living in the poorest properties. Most schemes operate in that way, although the other part of the Green Homes Grants, which is available to the general public, isn't means tested. The scheme will be implemented. We're very much targeted at low income households in fuel poverty.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the fuel poverty aspect of it is really important. Councillor Mott, you've got a question or a comment?
Well, it's kind of a question, kind of a comment. Sorry, Chair. It's just really following on from the issue that Councillor Leach raised, is that I know certainly towards the end of lockdown, when we could start moving, there suddenly appeared to be a rash of people banging on doors, offering various insulation schemes, grants, etc., purporting to be from the council. Some of them might well have been, certainly some of them weren't, and I know the issue was raised a lot in my ward as to actually how are people meant to know that this is a council-backed scheme rather than somebody just sort of taking a chance and banging on the door and hoping for access for other maybe disputable means, shall we say. So I think if we are going to run a council-backed scheme, can we please make it very clear that it is a council-backed scheme, and so that our residents have got that reassurance that it is a genuine scheme as opposed to one that is just sort of chancing, if you like, please.
Shall I come back there? Yes, I think it is difficult. There are a number of different schemes out there, and under the energy company obligation, there's a lot of people operating between the energy companies and the resident who can make some money. Let's be clear. So certainly Dave will pick up with any companies who are operating in a way and suggesting they're backed by the council when they're not, and I know he's done that on a number of occasions. I think we've got to, again, there's a balance. We really want to drive these measures going into as many properties as possible because for the financial situation, the fuel poverty of those households, but also for the improvement of the housing stock in line with our ambitions to reduce carbon emissions. So there is a balance, but certainly we would deal with any businesses or any operators who are going around and acting in an improper way. And if we can't dissuade them, then we would refer them to trading standards and so on. There is, let's say, it is a challenging area. The work we do is always very clear, and the scheme we're talking about today is small. It's only a small number of properties who will be approached directly from us, so there won't be any door knocking of any description in this regard.
Great, thank you, Mr. Powell. Councillor Ratcliffe, you've got a comment. If it's about sound insulation, I'm happy to take it, but if you could keep it brief and perhaps update Mr. Powell separately, fire away. Councillor Ratcliffe. I'm not getting anything, Barry. I don't know whether you've not managed
it looks like Councillor Ratcliffe may have dropped off.
Okay. Councillor Edmonds.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just really picking up on Councillor Daniel's point, how will there'll be a lot of properties around the borough which will need external wall insulation and heat source pumps. Just how will we identify the 20 properties that we're able to help, and can we ensure that we get a good coverage across the borough to make sure we, as far as possible, reach the corners of the borough to make sure that it's evenly distributed, please?
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Yes, I mean, yeah, that's a good point. I know that we're working on leads that we had through a previous scheme, as I mentioned earlier on. I'm not sure whether we're taking a geographical approach to it or a leads-based approach. A lot of properties, even though they would appear to be eligible for the external insulation, it's quite a challenge putting external insulation on. Changes the appearance of the property. Not all properties can be done, and also siting of air source heat pumps has some challenges. What I'll have a word with Dave and see if there is a way we can try and make it as sort of equitable in terms of the borough as possible, and get back to you on that, Councillor Edmonds.
Yes, thank you, Drew. And I will just point out at this stage that Lifton, sadly, has the highest level of fuel poverty in the borough. You may wish to store that in your memory as you take that point forward. But may I just conclude, Chair, if I may, in acknowledging the efforts of Dave Sexton in putting together this bid and being successful. And I'm sure he had help from members of his team as well. So I think it's a great achievement, and hopefully there'll be more of this to come as we move forward. If we can get these 20 done successfully, that will bode well for the future and being able to help further properties. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just say that as far as I understand it, we don't have to go and look. It looks like we probably have got enough leads. It's the time frame I'm concerned about mainly, because it's all right to say, yes, this house needs it, or we think it needs it, but certainly loads of properties shouldn't have external cladding, depending on what it's made, the actual building's constructed out of. So it's going to take quite a lot of evaluation of each property before we can come up and say, yes, that one's suitable. So I am slightly concerned about how we're going to get this all done by the end of March.
Perhaps just one comment on that, if I may, Chair. I think, I suppose it's always an advantage to have the money and have the challenge. We'll be doing our best, Dave and the team, to deliver against this. If the challenges that we've rightly identified today about deliverability and availability of installers and hardware mean that we struggle, I imagine other authorities will struggle as well. So I would hope that there'll be a sensible approach from the department in terms of retaining the money for future work. I think if we get a line of jobs booked in and approved, then I'm confident we'll be able to retain the money and deliver the outcomes we're after.
That's great. Thank you, everybody. Councillor Ratcliffe, I gather you're back online. If you've got a question or a quick comment about sound installation, I'm happy to take it. Bear in mind what we're debating or talking about at the moment.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Yes, and I'm obviously back online. I think the approved document for sound insulation in building is document E, and it is resistance to the passage of sound, which is what we're trying to achieve. Now, it is a very difficult thing to do. There are two types of sound. One is airborne sound, which is noise, radios, televisions, voices, and the other one is impact sound, which is the scraping of a chair, which is going to transmit through the structure. All of them are very difficult to do in quite elderly properties, but that is the document, that is the approved document. It's the building regulations part E, which we should pursue if we're going to try to improve these dwellings. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mott.
No, it was just really to help answer Councillor Edmonds' question, but that's already been done, I believe. Thank you.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. Any other questions, members? In which case, Councillor Leach, if I could ask you to move the recommendation.
Yes, I'd like to move the recommendation to which it can be found on page 157.
Can we have a seconder for that, please?
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you. Members, we moved into debate. Councillor Hipsey.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'd like to just commend the officers that have put a lot of work into obtaining this award, and I'd particularly like to say I'm very pleased that it is green, as far as I can see. It's very green in all respects, that we are talking about air source heat pumps and so on that are electrically driven, and as far as I can work out, we're not talking about any fossil fuel burning in this at all. So it definitely gets my my approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other items for the debate on this subject? I'm not getting anything else coming forward, and bearing in mind the nature of the recommendation, I'm again happy to deal with this by exception. So if you could indicate in the comments box if you're not prepared to support the recommendation. And Janice, I'm getting nothing coming forward, so again I will take that as a unanimous vote.
Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, members. That concludes the business that we have on the agenda for this afternoon. We do have a following meeting and all member briefing. So the meeting is now formally closed. I suggest that a short break might be in order, and if we could perhaps reconvene at 3